Encounters. Again, I would like to welcome you formally to the HELSUS Global South Encounters. With me, Franklin Obiodum, currently Associate Professor of Sustainability Science with Global Development Studies as the chair. If you would like to stay connected between the encounters, I would like to draw your attention to our new Twitter account, LinkedIn account, and just ecological political economy, the HELSUS Global South blog, links to which you can see in the chat box. Global ecological polycrises have been linked to growth, to degrowth, to extractivism, and to poverty. How to analyze all these issues simultaneously is no easy matter. South Africa further complicates the story. Its record of shocking social and spatial inequalities and complex relationship with Russia raise questions about unequal socioeconomic relations and unsustainable development. South Africa's economy is centered on coal extraction and extractivism. Indeed, so central is coal to energy and industry that Ben Fine and Zavare Rustomji and other political economists would describe a minerals energy complex. Since Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine and the West's hail of sanctions on Russia, the demand for South African coal has spiked, according to some reports, by at least 40%. A social media campaign contends that coal, originally meant to fuel power in South Africa, is now drained to the West. So, behind all the criticisms of the African National Congress as incompetent and Eskom, the state power company, as inefficient or as an incompetent state monopolist, lies a deeper story: Western ecological imperialism, the control of Southern energy resources for Western comfort. This narrative is contested. Much of the exported coal cannot be turned into energy anyway because of broken Eskom equipment and power stations. Eskom itself seems to confirm that it receives its needed supplies of coal. In any case, revenue from coal exports could help to finance energy production in South Africa. This specific coal question may be the focus of debate, but the place of what University of Johannesburg researchers call energy racism, inequality, and its ramifications is settled. Black people, regarded in Frantz Fanon's terms as the wretched of the earth, historically labored for the production of electricity, which only powered the comfort of the minority white population, who disproportionately make up what Thorstein Veblen once called the leisure class. Even today, power cuts and load shedding are experienced more frequently in Black townships, a painful reminder that the ANC continues to operate an apartheid system that was never meant to include Black people in the distribution of electricity and energy more widely. It is literally that black and white. The title of Mole Nkosi's book so aptly reflects the historical and contemporary realities. Black workers, white supervisors. There is, of course, a bit more nuance and a whole range of intersectional multiple identities in between, within, and across this structure. This continuing socio-spatial apartheid from African migrants to Asian and colored South Africans complete this collage. What is incomplete is what to do about how all these forces of social, spatial, and economic stratification have metastasized into what Black South Africans have called ecological apartheid. Black people have been protesting both white capital and Black state power, as detailed in Sethuligo Matabesi's book, Civil Strife Against Local Governance, Dynamics of Community Protest in Contemporary South Africa. Radicals face threats. Black protesters are gunned down by both white and Black power, as the Marikana massacre carried out by the South African Police Service illustrates. What can Witbank, South Africa's major coal town, teach us about ecological crisis, resource wars, cities, and sustainability? Professor Thulisile, Ncamsile, Mphambukeli, our speaker today, will help us to address these questions. Professor Mphambukeli is the first Black woman to obtain a PhD in urban and regional planning in South Africa. A well-known activist, planner, and scholar, a decorated intellectual and practitioner, she has been critical of both state-centric and market-based explanations and solutions to South Africa's spatial and socio-ecological crisis. Professor Mphambukeli's preferred approach seems to be a particular type of community-based framework, community-based work. And yet, currently the head of the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, Professor Thulisile splits her time between local and global commitments, deepening local engagements and strengthening global alliances. Clearly, Professor Mphambukeli recognizes that the challenge is both local and global. Indeed, her entry, Apartheid, in the Wiley Blackwell Encyclopedia of Urban and Regional Studies makes the point. But how can her preferred grassroots approach address such a local problem? Are there some articles of faith in the alternative championed by Professor Thulisile, who, it must be said, also holds postgraduate degrees in theology from the Faith Bible College? A certain amount of optimism is necessary to overcome the gravity of South Africa's ecological apartheid and energy racism. But is a local-based approach sufficient? To address these questions, Professor Thulisile Mphambukeli joins us from South Africa. Welcome, Professor Thule. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, Prof. Obeng Odom, for such an interesting introduction. I'm honored to have been invited to give this talk today. And although there's just so many ideas running in my head right now, I'm going to try and contain my presentation as per the topic of the day. So I need to share, please, my presentation. Please may you confirm if you can see?
Yes, we can see. It's not in presentation mode, but we can see your screen.
Okay. Is it now in presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so thank you everyone for joining this talk this morning, all protocol observed. The title of my presentation is The Political Economy of Energy Provisioning and Profiteering Nexus in South Africa, the case of Emalahleni, the coal city. Before I dive into my topic today, let me just lay a brief foundation, and I think Professor Franklin has actually touched on it a bit. This is not the first time I'm giving a talk on the political economy of and nexus issues. In my apartheid entry, I highlighted that South Africa's history is firmly tied to the global trajectory of colonialism and imperialism. That dominant social processes and the particular set of relationships between power and space were crucial in shaping the South African urban order, which, although overshadowed by apartheid, were similar to social processes in cities elsewhere. So hence we talk about global apartheid or global colonial apartheid. I argued that history is not without bias and interpretation. Sorry, I argued that history is not without bias and interpretation, and that we cannot ignore the history and the processes that shape them. So the power and legacies of colonial apartheid planning matrices has endured to this day in South Africa, both in mind and in action, either in terms of also broader political, social, and economic issues or land use management. So in our paper, where I co-authored with Professor Victor Okori and Professor Amusan, where we were exploring the political economy of water and food security nexus in BRICS, which is the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa partnership. We argued that the aid recipient nations become permanent customers of the benefactors. And with that, it gave me so many questions that I will also share with you this morning. One of them is, does this mean that current movements of the energy transition to clean energy is a neoliberal camouflage? The push that we've been seeing in recent times of saying South Africa must move towards clean energy, that South Africa must stop using its coal. Is it what do those actions and those iterations camouflage? And then there are complexities that I found there. But before I get into my presentation, let me just maybe orientate you in terms of where Emalahleni is situated. Emalahleni is part of the Ncamsile district municipality. As you can see there, it is a local municipality that includes areas such as Ochis, Gromdra, and Witbank, the city, as well as Emalahleni, KwaGuda, so many other areas. And also just to continue orientating you, so Emalahleni is still grappling with the apartheid scars of segregation and fragmentation, as those areas like KwaGuga, Akaville, Linville are pretty much 100% Black South Africans and internationals or Black Africans. And on the other side of the national roads, the black line in the middle, you get more white areas and Black elites staying there. So there is still that divide that you can see, that the colonial apartheid scars of segregation and fragmentation have endured till this day. So what you are seeing here now is Emalahleni, and I tried to highlight the mining activities that are happening there and the proximity of these mining activities within Emalahleni. Very, very interesting space. So this is an area that is supplying more than 80% of energy, not just to South Africa also, but they also are the top 5 exporters of coal in the world. So Emalahleni strikes me as the land of resources. It's the land of many complexities. Yeah, so that's why I was saying, you know, to start off my talk, I have to sort of like pitch it, because my work is more on advocacy. It's more on highlighting the experiences of those who are crudely impacted by the mining activities there. So that brings me to my main argument today, which is in terms of load shedding and climate change, the exchange of good coal for bad coal through illegal coal yards and the usage of this coal for energy production has injected more woes than wealth, vis-a-vis its negative impact on the lives of the local communities, particularly the people who live in poverty, of whom the majority are Black Africans. Indeed, the color of poverty in South Africa and possibly elsewhere are African Black people like myself. Now, the photos that you are seeing here, I'm going to tell a story. It is a photo of the coal that is being sold by the Zamazamas. And there's also another group called Shigas in Emalahleni. So Zamazamas, loosely translated to English, means go try and try again, or try and try again, basically. And the Shigas is a very interesting word that has been given to a group of people who include people of Indian origin, white people, and Black people, whom after a mine closes in Emalahleni, they come in and mine in their own way. And the Shigas is also like a class a relationship between the Shigas and the Zamazamas, because as I said, the Shigas includes even white people, Indian people, you know, African people, but they have some means of some sort, like they have their own transportation. They can hire people to extract the coal, and they supply those coals to various companies. So there is a war between these Shigas and the Zamazamas and the formal mining industries at Emalahleni. Now, so Emalahleni still produces coal, as I said. This is one of the power stations recently built that uses coal to keep the lights on, or however they're trying to do it. But this is where I think my talk is mainly situated. So there is a very complex relationship, very pervasive relationship, interwoven and rooted in power relationships, where the political economy of energy provisioning and profiteering. So the event, you know, Michel Foucault says, if you want to understand power relationships, you have to look at the events and work your way from the event and move outward. So the event that I decided to choose for this particular talk is that of coal swapping in Emalahleni, where the coal is mined from one point and it's supposed to go to Kusile, a power station. But between it being mined and being delivered at a power station, you get a place or spaces that have been created which are illegal, that are called coal yards, where the good coal is swapped for bad coal. So the bad coal includes even black stones or black rocks that then gets transported to the power station. And that creates all sorts of problems that are climate related, that are infrastructural related, where the machinery breaks and the pollution that comes out of the system is very detrimental to the lives of the local people at Emalahleni. Now, if you look at this kind of system that I've tried to, as a way of explaining this, you have, on one hand, as I said, the continuity in change, right, which is the accumulation by dispossession. As we know, coal is supposed to be a common resource that the state is responsible for in order to distribute, the energy throughout to many South Africans. However, coal in South Africa, through the issuing of licenses, mining licenses, has been privatized to a larger degree. What does that mean? It means it's not just coal that is going to Eskom that I'm interested in. I'm talking about coal and the associated byproducts that comes from its processing that we don't necessarily talk about when we talk about energy transition. So you find that this coal is transported basically to the other parts of the country, particularly in Europe. So this is coal that burns or that supports the fourth industrial revolution's activities in terms of its grand scale. So it was very interesting to have come across a security guard who was guiding a coal that had been washed. So I don't know if you know that in the process of sifting and organizing coal, there's a process of washing it. Now, in my encounter with the security person there, this introduced a very interesting angle where, on one hand, this security guard is guiding this coal, which is clean, and he informed me that this was grade A coal, and only grade A, by the way, gets to be transported to Europe. That his lights at his home were out because he was informed that he owed 3,500 rands. So he was very, very disturbed by the fact that he, on one hand, there he is looking at the coal in front of him, guiding it, but on the other hand, his home had no energy running, which is very, very interesting to me. And then I came across another local as well, who took me, because the correct entry to communities is very important, who took me to a site where De Beers, and now they're called another name, is mining coal. Not coal that is supplied to Eskom, by the way, but coal that is exported to Europe. She had a clear memory of her home being in what I saw as a pile of coal, and opposite the road. So on that street, we had on one side a coal that had been washed and coal that had not been washed. So she was narrating the story to me of how her home used to be there and how they used to cross the streets to go to school, and only coal is there now. But what was interesting is that she can't even really see clearly because of the mining activities that are happening at Emalahleni, which has really impacted on her life in so many levels, including her almost being blind. So there are these stories that again touches on how local people at Emalahleni fight for their health. And then I came across also a 40-year, an elderly pensioner man who used to work in the mines for 40 years. And in working in the mines for 40 years, gave him those skills that he is now using as a zamazama himself, because working for 40 years in the mines didn't guarantee or secure him any pension that he can enjoy. So there is a continuity in change, the change being those who are sitting in the positions of power being Black, but the system itself disadvantaging and symbolically violating Black South Africans and Black Africans in South Africa. So infrastructural violence is not then just an issue of infrastructure as the infrastructure in terms of a particular site, but it's people as infrastructure as well, because people who were working in mines were basically, if we draw from Myron Aris Young's 5 Phases of Oppression, were marginalized, exploited, and there was symbolic violence on them, because if you work in the mines for 40 years and after that you still have to go and work again to put food on the table, it tells you a really interesting story. So there is a tragedy in of the commons. It's Emalahleni. So from an economic perspective, then the tragedy of the commons is an economic problem, where we see that we have got goods that we call common goods that are supposed to be accessed by anyone, but because of self-interests, there is people have invested in these goods, ultimately moving towards either depleting these goods or reserving these goods for future use. And that brings me again, so please forgive me, because planning is very messy. So I'm moving now to this whole issue of what exactly is going on here within this political economy of energy provisioning and its value chain, regarding how it's actually positions those who are living below the poverty lines. And I find the accumulation by dispossession and the tragedy of the commons an interesting nexus, because last year we experienced the war between Ukraine and Russia, where Russia switched off the gas. And during that time, the talks politically were that South Africa is transitioning to clean renewable energy. But when the West or Europe couldn't get the gas, inadequate gas from Russia, they did come to South Africa, and South Africa was exporting coal, grade A coal, whereas local people were struggling to access energy during the time. So in the paper that we wrote a couple of years ago about Emalahleni, that was 2016, we already highlighted that there is an electricity crisis in South Africa, which unfortunately has intensified over the years. So there are those contradictions that I believe are going to hinder the progress towards any clean transition process where we are now not using coal in South Africa. So there is that nexus. And then there is a nexus of also climate change and people living below the poverty line. So if you go to Emalahleni, people tell you it gets worse at night, because what the mining companies do, they don't emit toxic gases or greenhouse gases during the day. They actually do it at night. And it comes out and you can even feel on your skin. I stayed there collecting data for a whole month one time. And you smell, I said to a colleague yesterday, if I can transport the smell that you smell at Emalahleni to you via WhatsApp. Unfortunately we can't transport or transfer smells, but that area is not an area that you can have a fruitful life in terms of the quality of the air that is there. That's why children are suffering from asthma, people are suffering from TB, cancer, and eye problems, because it's just an area that is highly polluted. Okay, so yeah. Let me just continue to the next slide, please. Can you see the next slide?
Yeah.
It didn't move.
Not yet. We can see a slide where there is middle, the political economy of energy provisioning and profiteering nexus.
Okay. I have another slide. Let me maybe stop sharing image to share.
Yeah, let's try that. That usually works.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So what's with the event of swapping coal, one gets a sense that Emalahleni has become a gangster paradise, where wicked problems exist that are interwoven with the continuation of the colonial apartheid matrices of power. And it has now produced what I termed dangerous mindscapes. And I'm going to link this dangerous mindscapes concept to Fanon's work, The Wretched of the Earth, when he said, for the longest time, the underdeveloped class fights for its liberation. And at a decisive moment where they have to now, they gain their independence and they have to now pave the way in terms of implementing what they've been fighting for, which is adequate access for all, access to basic services for all. They don't make the decisions. It says what they do, they then decide to fill the shoes of the colonial masters. They become lawyers, doctors, entrepreneurs. So now the situation at Emalahleni is overwhelming for a researcher when you look at it, because when you are there, you see that there is no way that South Africa can anytime soon transit to clean energy, because coal is the main energy source that is so entrenched there that not only South Africa depends on, but the West also depends on. for many of their industrial activities. Now, the dangerous mindscapes come from a position where, since the ruling party knows that they cannot solve this X and Y the way they had thought they would, because why would you use the very system that's created the problem to solve it, right? So what they do, they keep their heads down. They know that the water that comes out of the taps in many low-income communities, etc., are not suitable for human consumption. But instead of admitting that there is a problem there that needs to be solved and actually saying they don't know how they can solve this problem, they insist that they are providing. There's an ideological mantra of distributive, a distributive paradigm that they will provide water to every household, they will provide sanitation, they will do this, they will do this. But even though it's been years that they have not been able to provide basic services adequately. So they keep their heads down and they say, but these people are indigent. Why? They must just be thankful that they have some form of water. These people are immigrants. They are not even South Africans. They're illegal immigrants. That's how they construct people. So there's this oppression, continuation of oppression and marginalization of the people who are living below poverty lines. And then there's what this gangster paradise produces is a resource curse, because with this resource curse, everybody wants to have their hands on this resource for selfish reasons, as we said. And the dangerous landscapes that are produced there has to do with the whole issue of burning sinkholes that are regularly experienced by the people of Emalahleni. Because the water runoffs, there are issues there in terms of what happens to the water that they use to wash the coal to make it clean. And if you look at the scale and magnitude of this coal washing and the piles, you start to realize that it uses a lot of water. But South Africa, again, here's another contradiction. South Africa is a water scarce country that has so many mining activities that depends on water. And the water that we are currently getting here, where I am in Johannesburg, comes from the Lesotho Highlands. Even now, for the past 2 days, I haven't had a decent, 2.5 days, I haven't had a decent shower because at my home, there's no water. So that is the what we call the wicked problems that we have to grapple with. So I have more questions than answers today for you. I have more questions because I'm trying to understand what exactly we think we are doing as a country. Why are we finding it difficult to dismantle this system that is so entrenched and has continued what we call, we can say we are experiencing holistic social engineering now, because when the apartheid system or the energy distribution system was working, it wasn't privileging Black people. And the current system is also not privileging Black people who now have to sell coal on the sides of the streets to make ends meet. And going back to where we were before, which is we need to use other alternatives to access such important basic services as electricity. So I think I'm gonna end there. I'm deliberately not gonna bring in philosophical, or theories into this discussion, but just to highlight that there is a continuity in change that camouflages itself and manifests in so many different ways there at Emalahleni. So yeah, let me stop there, Prof.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thuli, for a very thought-provoking talk. In his an inquiry concerning the progress of the nation and the probable exhaustion of our coal mines, the coal question for short. W.S. Jevons examined the centrality of coal to the nation and the world, but he did not analyze cities, nor did he look at the realities of regions, race, and energy. The global South and the global North, unequal relations. So your use of cities and regions surely deepens our understanding of the new coal question and its racist ecological crisis. This lucid originality makes the problem and its ramifications crystal clear. Perhaps you could, Prof. Thuli, consider fleshing out how much power Black mayors or mayors in general, actually have to effect change. And I would also appreciate your thought on why mining companies seem to have so much control of coal cities and towns. And if you could, just to close off, say something about, well, if the ANC approach has no future, whether the economic freedom fighters' policy of militant grassroots socialism, including nationalizing the mines, provide a formidable alternative. So three questions in one, if you could say a little bit about all these briefly before we invite others to comment or ask questions.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Let me start with the third question, which is, if the ANC currently, the ruling party, is not adequately addressing issues of energy and climate change nexus, and how then they disproportionately position those who are living below poverty line in post-apartheid South Africa, is the EFF's strategy or manifesto of nationalizing the mines an option. I am not convinced that that will be the solution for South Africa, simply because the negotiations that happened prior to 1994 ensured white privilege in South Africa. That is why these companies currently are not even owned by Black people in South Africa. Mostly these are white-owned companies, and the owners are not South Africans. Their headquarters are based elsewhere. So whatever is happening here, they are safeguarding these resources for them where they come from, in their countries of origins, where they have to ensure that the resources such as coal arrive there safely. So if you were to embark on solving these dilemmas, these quagmires, you'll have to start setting up the systems now, which I don't see the EFF doing. I'll make an example, and I'm not a politician in any way, just my observations generally, is that you hear the distributive paradigm ideological mantra is problematic. One, are we willing to accept that, for example, informality is here to stay? Right? It's not going anywhere. We're not going to eradicate informal settlements, for example. Are we willing to accept that, as the EFF will say, every house will have a flushable toilet? Now, again, we have a problem with the system of sanitation in South Africa. On one hand, there is a nexus between water and sanitation, meaning you can't keep flushing a toilet. It's considered madness to flush the toilet and then that water comes back to your tap and you drink it. So my work comes from a position of advocacy planning, the incorporation of social justice in planning, where I am asking, is the government or the political parties who aspire to be in power willing, through co-production mechanisms, learn from what I call teen cities? Because if you map the scale and magnitude of the teen cities in South Africa, you find that of the homes that are made out of tin, they're at a magnitude of cities themselves. And where they are, they don't use sanitation that is dependent on water. So are they willing to learn from people in terms of how have you improvised on sanitation all these years whilst we were ideologically telling you that we were going to bring you flushable toilets? So there is the system that we need to be moving towards is a system that does not look at water in terms of where humans are concerned when we do human excreta. Anyways, before the flushable toilet was introduced in Africa, there were no cholera outbreaks, there were no issues. We knew how to work with the environment as African people to make sure that that resource, because it's manure that must nourish our soil, a soil which is the skin of the earth. It must be healthy all the time. We understood those fundamental principles as African people. But the introduction of, for example, an alternative kind of sanitation that is highly dependent on water became a problem for us, and it still is a problem. So the systems are very important to set up. You can't aspire to be in a position of power and then you say you set up the systems. It was supposed to have started more than 20 years ago. So what we ended up doing was to use the very system that created these problems for us: mining systems, water systems, water purification systems, sanitation systems. We use the very same systems that were not even designed for us as Black African in mind to solve the problems of those systems. So we are faced with really wicked problems and challenges, particularly my discipline of urban and regional planning, because we are supposed to be the custodians and thinkers, future strategists of land use management in South Africa. But again, in South Africa, planning is political. If you talk to planners at Emalahleni, for example, I asked one planner, it seems as if you are saying to me, there is no room for you to do strategic planning. So what is it then that you are doing? And I remember he said, let me find a nasty word for it. I think we are doing a remedial measure here, because all we do is reactive planning. If people have invaded a particular land, if we don't remove them within 24 hours, 48 hours, then we, by law, obliged to provide basic services to them, even though the area where they are inhabiting is not suitable for people to stay there. So planners we're running around trying and reacting and doing a remedial measure instead of doing what we are trained, which is to sit down and envision futures, strategically, scenarios, like if this and this continues, we will likely to experience this and that. And if you want to check my work on planning for quality infrastructure in BRICS, I use those methods of future strategic planning, where I did envisage that there will be infrastructural violence if we continue to marginalize people. There's gonna be a time when they say, we are so many of us, we are the masses, but we are living under the poverty line, whereas very few have made it. And you saw the looting that happened after the floods in KZN, the April floods last year, where people just went and looted malls, etc. That was part of also infrastructural violence. But it's a reactive kind of violence also, because they themselves, people have because of cheap labor and being exploited as infrastructure, where now, again, if you read Fanon's work about violence, he says, you know, you introduce a gun to a black man, then there must be equal violence to counter, you know, for every action there must be an equal but opposite reaction. And I don't think Fanon talks about violence as killing people or white people. I don't think that's the kind of violence I will also be, you know, I'm advocating for, no. But the system itself is very violent towards Black people, and we need a similar kind of violence to counteract it as we move towards making spaces just for everyone.
Thank you. That's a comprehensive response, showing the links between broader philosophical issues, even though you said you weren't going into philosophical issues, you know, pointing to Fanonian ideas of violence, even implicitly referring to George's thoughts on absentee land ownership or absentee ownership in the Veblennian tradition, and then detailed grassroots community level realities. Now, the microphone is right in the middle of the room, so questions are invited from the audience. Cool. I think show by hand. Yes. First question, I think, is it Ranzu? Ranzu, you have the microphone. You may turn on your video or just microphone. So Ranzu first, and then Siziwe.
Morning. I'm Ranzu. I'm from the University of Witwatersrand. And thank you, Prof, for your interesting insights on your presentation. What I'm interested in is more predominantly your methodology. I find it quite interesting and challenging being in a mining town and environment. My question is, how did you manage to navigate or infiltrate the environment to ascertain such rich insights from that particular environment? And how were you able to get the trust of not only the community at large, but it seems like you also engaged with the securities, some of the zamazamas, because it is quite a dangerous and volatile environment. So how did you navigate that space? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ranzu. Okay, so my intellectual project is not disconnected from who I am and where I was born. I was born in Lamontville Township in Durban. It was a township designed for Black lower middle class elites in 1934, around the 1930s. And so my work is about advocating for the communities that I'm familiar with, right? So Witbank, interestingly, is a place where two of my daughter's grandparents are staying. So I have direct entry into the community, and I've been there I've known the communities for more than 17 years now. So that gave me a very, very interesting and deep access into the area. So I'm an insider. I'm part of the community. So when I talk to people, they don't see me as a researcher from outside. And they understand, and I understand that I am doing advocacy work. I have to tell their stories. That's what I owe the communities that I'm familiar with. I don't want my work to be superficial and, just to, produce articles for the sake of producing articles, but it has to be meaningful. So that space, I've developed trust over years amongst the community. So, and that's what separates me from many researchers in my field in terms of their access to particular spaces that only, people like myself can have access to.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thuli. Sizwe, I think you are next. and then we might be able to take a question from Nskopodi briefly as we come close to the end of the event. So, Sizwe, you have the mic.
Morning, everyone. And thanks a lot for the presentation. One thing I can say, it couldn't be said more clearer, you know. Everything was just explicit. I haven't been to that part of outside the country that much. Anyway, I'm Sizwe Mbata from the University of Johannesburg. I'm a student doing my master's in quantity surveying. It's just funny. It's just funny. I don't want to lie that there is people like you, Prof. Thulisile. You I don't want to say you are brave, but you're a true legend, living legend. You know, it's what I would say myself. I'm also advocating, especially. I mean, the construction management and quantity surveying department at UJ. I'm also trying to advocate for something. I would say it's more or less similar. The compromise of the infrastructure development in the sense that tenders are just given at random to people who don't really have the expertise to carry out the projects. Hence, we have deteriorating infrastructure development. So for me, it's not really a question, you know, it's just to admire your work because as you're saying, you are just one outstanding researcher. You're not just doing your work maybe to be superficial, but now going to the core, going to the values, you know, it's just like, it's just too much, man, for one to handle. If I can put in that sense. You just said that it's not like there are parts or aspects that you wanna touch with what you've just presented, and to me, like those are the core questions that should be asked. First of all, with our leaders, you also touch on the leaders on how the leadership is actually compromising everything that I would say was fought for, if I can put it in that sense. But my question is, how do we now narrate a story going forward? Because all the stories that are being narrated are from backwards. How to narrate now a story going forward? Because now we have a problem of load shedding and energy. We need energy. How do we narrate a story going forward of mitigating the problem of grade A coal being shipped and the other classes of coal being used to generate electricity, which compromises the infrastructure? How do we now narrate a story going forward? If I can just end there, because
thank you.
It wasn't a question, but to acknowledge and really appreciate the work that has been done. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. We all share your the point about Prof. Thulis's inspiring talk. We are almost, I think we are right on at the end of the event. So I will, Nkopodi, if you have just a brief comment or question, I might allow this, but otherwise, I think that we might continue maybe after the event on. Perhaps this is more useful to continue after the event so that you are not rushed. So with that agreement, I'd like to bring the event to an end.